is the shutter in the camera found?
The body of the camera.
Right. Remember, it's going to be found in our camera body, and it's going to be in front of the recording medium. Remember, we have a focal plane shutter in the camera body right in front of the recording medium. Now, if we had a leaf shutter, it would be found in the lens, but we don't use leaf shutters because we use SLR cameras. Again, the aperture is found here. And again, we can adjust it by turning that collar, and we can either open or close it down. With me so far? Okay. Now, notice that in aperture, the number, 22, 11, 16, those numbers are what we refer to as f-stops. F-stops. And they're the F full stops. In fact, we need to actually write them down, because just like I expect you to have memorized the shutter speed full stops, I also expect that you will have memorized the aperture full stops. Any good photographer should have these memorized. Right? So we already have the shutter speed full stops listed here, right? Let's list the apertures next. And we're going to list them from 1 to 32. We're going to start with 1, and then we're going to go all the way to 32. And they're not super difficult to remember if you remember the first 2. All right, so we're going to go from 1 to 32. Let's list the first one. It's just 1. That's easy. The next one on the list is 1.4. 1.4. Now, I want you to understand, not all lenses will go that low. Okay? So the lens you have in front of you doesn't go that low. But you still should know what they are. Okay? Now, if you remember 1 and 1.4, you can get all the rest in the list. This is what you do. To get the next one on the list, you go to the one above and you double it. So above 1.4 is 2. If you double, above 1.4 is 1. If you double it, it is 2. All right, if we use that same rule, how would we get the next one?
2.8.
1.4 doubled would be 2.8. Exactly right. All right, again, if I go to the one above, 2 doubled would be 4. So what's the next one on the list? If I go 2.8, I double it, I get 5.6. 4 doubled is 8. Now here's where it's somewhat tricky. Technically, 5.6 doubled would be 11.2, but at this time we just go to whole numbers. So now we just go straight to 11. What's next on the list? So if we go just above 11 is 8. If we double it, 8 doubled is 16. What's the next one on the list? 11 doubled is 22. And then again, 16 doubled is 32. So far, so good. Again, you don't actually have to remember all the numbers. What are really the only 2 you have to remember? The first 2. If you remember the first 2, you can get all the other ones. Just like with shutter speed, if you really just remembered 1, it's easy because it's just doubled. 1, 2, 4, 8, 15. So far, so good? Now, it's interesting though. Look at these shutters, look at these f-stops rather. Some of these are decimals, like 5.2, 2.8, right? We're going to talk about where those numbers come from and what they mean. But before we do that, grab your lens. So hold that lens out in front of you again. What is the largest number that's on that aperture die, that f-stop die? It's 22, right? So this lens doesn't go all the way to 32, does it? And what's the smallest number on your lens? 3.4. So it doesn't go all the way up either. That's okay. Not all lenses will. Okay. A quick indicator, by the way, of a higher quality lens. The lower the aperture number it will go to, typically the more quality the lens is. So do you think this is a really quality lens? It's not exactly crap, but it's not the best. Now, what I'd like you to do, please, hold the lens in front of you, and I want you to turn the dial to F22, or the number 22. Okay? So turn it to 22. So on the dial here, on our illustration up here, we have 22, 16. So 22 is this one right here, right? Whereas this one is 4. Look through the lens and tell me, the opening of the aperture, is it really, really closed down or really, really wide open? It's not closed all the way, right? There's still an opening there, but it's not very big. It's really small, okay? Now what I want you to do is now I want you to adjust the aperture to the smallest number. On this lens, it's 3.4. And then look through the lens. Tell me what happened to the aperture. It opened up part. Now, When I first learned photography, that seemed counterintuitive to me. Because normally when you think a big number should mean that the opening's bigger, and a small number should mean that the opening's smaller. But it's actually opposite. A big number actually means that the opening is smaller. A small number actually means the opening is bigger. I'm going to explain why in just a moment, but I want you to make sure you implant that. If you remember last week I gave you that important statement that I told you to write in your notes and highlight it. When it comes to shutter speed, I said big numbers equal what? Less light. Big numbers equal less light. So on our list of shutter speeds here, what gives me more light? A shutter speed of 1,000 or a shutter speed of 8? 8. Big numbers, when it comes to shutter speed, big numbers mean that the shutter opens and closes very rapidly, so you do not get a lot of light. So if you needed more light, you would need to slow the shutter down. So you'd need to go to a smaller number. So as you decrease the shutter speed number, you actually increase light. The aperture is the same way. Again, if you look, everybody please adjust your aperture to f22. Remember the largest number on this lens is 22. If you look through here, f22, is that opening really, really wide or is it really, really narrow? It's really narrow, right? So f22 is this really narrow opening, whereas f4 is this really wide opening. So what's going to give you more light? f22 or f4? 4 is. It's going to be more wide open. Again, that seems contrary though, right? Normally you would think big number means that the opening is bigger, but it's actually the other way around. A big number actually means the opening is smaller, which also means you get less light. So if you're going outside tonight and you're going to take photos, remember the sun's already set, it's dark outside. If you were choosing apertures, f-stops, for taking photos outside, would you choose f4 or f22? Outside at night and it's dark. 4. Remember, big numbers mean less. If you can tattoo that on your brain, I guarantee you will be a better photographer. Big numbers mean less light. If you are outside and it's dark and you don't have a lot of light, you need more. If you need more light, you need to go to a smaller number because that means the aperture is going to be opened farther. It's going to let in more light. So that rule applies to both shutter speed and aperture. Let me tell you, folks, next week you're going to do your first photo assignment where you are using the cameras manually, which means you are going to take photos, and every single photo you're going to have to manually adjust the aperture and manually adjust the shutter, and then do a test to see if you have the right settings, and then go ahead and take your photo. And there are a couple of you, in fact, probably maybe even as many as half of you, are going to have problems, and that's okay. And you're going to come and ask me a question. And you're going to say, Brett, I'm trying to take a photo out here in the hallway of our building here. And as I go to take my photo, my light meter keeps telling me that the photo is way too dark, way underexposed. Remember, when the light meter is going towards the negative, that means it is underexposed. So when you come and ask me for help, the question I'm going to immediately ask you is, okay, tell me what your settings are. When I say tell me what your settings are, what I want you to tell me is, what do you have the shutter speed set at, and what do you have the aperture set at? And so what's going to happen is a couple of you are going to come to me and say, well, Brett, right now I have my shutter speed set at 1,000, and I have my aperture set at 22. Okay? Now you guys are chuckling. I will be too, just not out loud. Right? I'm not going to, I promise I will never laugh in any of your faces. But on the inside, I will be laughing. And why are you guys laughing? Because you should be. When you come to me and say, my photo is underexposed, and I ask you what your settings are, and you tell me that you're using really big numbers, I will ask you, well, did you write in your notes, big numbers mean less light? Because if you're not getting enough light, it's because you're using an ultra-fast shutter speed, and you're also using an aperture that is almost all the way closed down. So no wonder your photos are so dark. The shutter is moving very rapidly. The aperture is almost all the way closed down. There's hardly any light at all getting through the camera hitting your recording medium. That's why your photos are too dark. So if your photos are too dark, what should you do with either the aperture or the shutter speed? Go to a smaller number. That will increase the amount of light. That'll fix your exposure problem. Yes?